Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. There's still some strong rhetoric towards the Chinese over the legacy autos. The narrative seems to be that the Chinese will beat legacy. In fact, all legacy will go bankrupt and it would just be Tesla and the Chinese left. But what is it the Chinese have done that is so impressive over legacy autos? Is this really the case? Do legacy have no chance? Are the Chinese set to dominate? Well, let's find out. It's quite simple, you see. Tesla will be the Apple and the Chinese will be the Android. And you see, the world is transitioning to electric vehicles over internal combustion vehicles. Tesla was first to market and dominating, just like Apple did. There'll be some lower cost competitors enter the market and start to eat up Tesla's market share, because not everyone can afford a Tesla. Some people only want a $25,000 EV and can't even fathom spending around $60,000. Tesla are cutting out the majority of the market with their exuberant prices, and very few consumers can afford that. Well, that's today, where Tesla only make 1 million cars a year. Mercedes make twice that many cars, and all the cars they make are high-priced Mercedes. In other words, the market is large enough for Tesla's prices that high at that level of quantity. However, when Tesla start making significantly more vehicles, around 3 to 5 million a year, then it's likely there'll be some lower priced variants. But that might take years. In the meantime, there can be some lower priced EVs to gain market share for the lower segment, like Toyota did for the ICE industry. Makes sense, right? Alright, I have a kind of feeling the future will go somewhat this way. ICE cars' demand will drop, whilst their prices and running costs increase, essentially imploding the industry, making it too expensive for ICE to be feasible. Therefore, more consumers turn to electric, or just about all consumers, as the new car ICE industry would have gone. Yes, Tesla is the best and everyone wants a Tesla, so the Tesla waiting list goes through the roof. You can't buy a Tesla for perhaps 2 years or something. Therefore, everyone will buy Chinese EVs, as all the internal combustion companies went under. But the thing is, despite what the statistics have told you, there are not close to enough Chinese EVs either. There aren't even enough Chinese EVs for the Chinese yet, the world's largest auto market by quantity. There simply aren't enough EVs to meet the consumer demand. In the meantime, the new auto consumers are holding onto their existing cars longer, as an EV is still too expensive. Yet at the same time, gas prices are rising and their vehicle becomes more expensive to run. Equally, the EV is costing less to run, equivalent to an ICE. Anyway, long story short, there aren't enough EVs for sale, Tesla has a huge waiting list, and there aren't enough Chinese EVs either. Therefore, I don't think the scenario where the Chinese wipe out legacy will occur. I think there are market forces that will adapt prior to that. The fact that there is so much demand for EVs and these ICE companies that are going under happen to have these enormous expensive battery and cell factories, along with factories that build electric cars, that these parts of the legacy business will survive. Personally, I think the EV business will become separate from the current legacy business. Whether sold out in Chapter 11 or somehow becoming a separate entity, I think running an ICE business and an EV business under the same umbrella is just too conflicting. But in these new Phoenix-like EV legacy businesses, I believe they would have cut out the car dealer model, or at least be able to sell directly to the consumer online, boycotting dealerships and thus increasing profit margins. Therefore, these legacy EV businesses have the capability of making EVs, and if demand is that high, then prices will rise accordingly, and costs might be low enough that there is an actual profit. Alright, so perhaps this leaves us with Tesla as the superior EV that almost everyone wants, then the low-cost Chinese EVs, then the branded legacy EVs. But if there's demand for 80 million or so vehicles a year, and Tesla are only producing a quarter of that by say 2030, then that is a huge market for the rest of them. However, within time I do expect that robotaxis could potentially reduce that number. But even so, there's still bound to be demand for at least 40 million or so vehicles a year. Drivers will be getting sick of driving ICE and the costs. They are all one bad engine service away from going electric. Well, one service and maybe 2 or 3 years for a Tesla, maybe 5 years for a Cybertruck. Well, a lot of the legacy autos have given their targets for 2030. We could have a quick review. Mercedes are aiming for 200 gigawatt hours a year, Volkswagen 240, Ford 240, and the list goes on. And we've yet to see what all the Japanese autos are going to come up with. Anyway, at a guess, legacy may end up achieving around 1.5 terawatt hours a year of cells between them all, at least according to their targets. That's enough for 20 million vehicles, using battery packs with today's cell size and efficiency. Legacy are already building and planning these factories and have partnered up with the likes of LG, SK Innovation, Norfolk, BYD in order to achieve these goals. By 2030, that should also be enough time to fix the supply chains, and the invisible hand of the free market has done its thing and massively expanded mining for the likes of nickel and lithium, thus reducing prices and increasing supply. Of course, we don't even know what the bottleneck is with legacy and Chinese EVs yet. It might be the raw minerals, or it may be the speed at which they can build factories and produce cells. Remember, Tesla is the one saying they need more mines, as they can build factories faster than new mines can expand, whereas legacy need to build about 10 times as much factory for the same output as Tesla. Case in point, Volkswagen aiming for 240 gigawatt hours by 2030, Giga Texas alone should have an output of that perhaps by 2024, and it took just over a year to construct. So there is a possibility that legacy and the Chinese will still not be constrained so much by the raw minerals, as it's going to take them so long to ramp up. Now, the Chinese EVs will likely be satisfying the Chinese market first, as it's a lot easier logistically, and China is trying to make a big movement into EVs. It is an enormous market anyway, and the largest battery manufacturer is also located there. However, Tesla will be taking the majority of what CATL produce, leaving whatever is left for the Chinese EVs. BYD make their own in-house cells though, and are already supposedly getting close to a run rate of around 100 gigawatt hours a year. However, they are at no more of an advantage than legacy autos. Just because they're using LFP cells, it doesn't mean they can get around the dry battery electrode process. There's no inkling of anyone else cracking that, or even attempting it. LFP batteries appear to be scaling faster, simply because you can build factories faster in China, and all the LFP batteries are made in China. Anyway, at that rate though, BYD could be a major player, perhaps as big as 500 gigawatt hours a year by 2030, and CATL could be at 1 terawatt hour. Then there are the other battery companies, which may very well also be producing LFP batteries by this stage. Panasonic, LG, SKI, Samsung, they will all likely be producing batteries for the other legacy and Chinese EVs that don't have their own in-house cell production. They could also be producing another terawatt hour a year. So we estimate about 1.5 terawatt hours from legacy autos, another 1.5 terawatt hours from China, although a lot of that will also be earmarked for Tesla. However, a lot of the Chinese EVs will have significantly smaller batteries and can thus go further in units per kilowatt hour. But now we would have enough EVs for about 30 million in China. Remember, a lot of these cars are so small and cheap, they're replacing scooters, not cars. Likely enough batteries for around 20 million legacy autos, then another 20 million Teslas, and enough robotaxis to reduce the demand for vehicle ownership. Of course, if Elon is sandbagging and Tesla hit more like 40 million in 10 years' time, then there'll be an oversupply of electric vehicles from legacy and Chinese, if they're building factories for this many vehicles. I mean, Mercedes making 200 gigawatt hours a year, and if each vehicle by then only requires a 60 kilowatt hour battery, then that's enough cells for 3.3 million vehicles, which is almost 20% more than they sell now, and they plan on selling ICE as well. If Tesla ends up with 50% market share, then that would mean Mercedes would end up selling fewer cars, not more. It's almost like legacy are assuming their market share will actually increase, despite Tesla expanding to the largest automaker in the world, eating up everyone's market share. But why buy a legacy EV over a Chinese EV? Well, for starters, governments will protect their local auto industries and use protectionism, although Tesla managed to get around this by building local factories. Something that will be more of a challenge for a Chinese EV company, I would say. Also, a lot of the cost savings the Chinese generate are from the fact they can manufacture in China. I think they would lose their cost advantage quickly building elsewhere. But at the end of the day, I think we can almost group the Chinese into the LFP battery group. If you want an LFP battery EV, which to put succinctly is going to mean cheaper but a lot less range, then you can get that from a Chinese EV. If you want some decent range and a brand you're familiar with and trust, then buy a legacy EV. Although I suspect that the Japanese will be a combination of the both. I think the likes of Toyota have to go for LFP, and Toyotas will simply have less range. That will be the compromise. In fact, I can see the Japanese EVs may compete more head-to-head with the Chinese EVs. Yes, it's going to be exciting to see what EV manufacturing techniques the Japanese can come up with to beat the Chinese, although the Japanese do have a ton of batteries they need to start making. My point is, even if Tesla managed to make enough EVs and robotaxis for half the market, there's still going to be plenty of consumers that need vehicles if they can't wait for a Tesla. By 2030, I am sure the others should have some sort of version of FSD too, and would have caught up where Tesla is about today in manufacturing. Or perhaps that's being too generous. I'm not sure they'll ever reach this far, just like Yahoo will never catch up to where Google is now in 2030. Anyway, there simply won't be enough Teslas for everyone, and it would appear the rest of the industry is doing what they can to make sure they can also supply the global auto market by building and expanding enough factories. They'll be offering a variety of different EVs to fit all types of lifestyles and applications. I don't think the Chinese will defeat legacy. For the Chinese to beat legacy, they have to save costs, but also continue to undercut legacy on price after shipping and exporting the products to, e.g., Europe, to compete with the local vehicle industry after facing tariffs. Of course, the legacy autos can instantly charge more too, due to offering a brand that has value and thus increased profits. So it's going to be really tough for the Chinese in some markets. I see them having more chance in nations like Australia and Norway, where there isn't a local auto market to compete. It's going to be really tough for the Chinese to come into the home turf of other OEMs and try and compete there. They may find a market, but I think it will be small, possibly similar to their overseas ICE market now. Equally, it might be tough for legacy EVs to compete in China. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.